Going to the top stories, we're going to quickly unpack part of what has come out of the political report that has been tabled by President Jacob Zuma, the outgoing president of the ANC, his final report. In studio with us, we're joined by political analyst Lukhona Mnguni.
And of course, Professor Susan Boyce. And if I may start with you, Prof, just your overall impressions of that political report.
Well, it was a perfect fusion of a State of the Nation address, what has been going on year after year, and then the ANC internal organizational one in which President Zuma very importantly acknowledged problems there, but he never acknowledged his own role in those problems, and he really used that forum thoroughly to mete out justice to these enemies, to the courts, and to comrades that take the ANC to court, to civil society, to business. ANC was seen as a pretty passive recipient that really had to be protected, as if there is no agency on this side in what had gone wrong. We even got a few mentions of Marikana in there. Of course, that could very well be seen as a backhander to candidate Cyril Ramaphosa, while the Women's League and the Youth League were praised extensively for their advancement of women and women candidates and so on. So it was quite a blend, which Zuma really thought this was his last chance and he wanted to have the last say. Interestingly, the audience reaction, it were few occasions where there was a bit of mild applaud, but it wasn't a wildly enthusiastic, passionate audience listening to a dear president departing.
Lukhona, as far as this is his swan song as he goes out of the ANC, was it what it needed to be, given perhaps 10 years ago when he came and took over the reins of the party?
Well, I mean, you have to appreciate what has happened in the past 10 years with the kind of momentum against him building up, especially in the last 2 years, people having been highly dissatisfied with his leadership. The fact that he could still hold the conference to be quiet, no heckling, they listened throughout. Yes, there were some applauses here and there. I think it really showed that people are willing to respect him for this moment, keep some level of unity, whether manufactured or otherwise, to demonstrate to the public that they are here to carry on with the business of conference and they are not going to mete out the type of tension or vitriol that was visited on President Thabo Mbeki when he reached Polokwane, for example. So I think in that sense, he exists with some level of dignity, but of course he had to deal with the question of whether he is holding grudges or not about the people that have asked him to step down, and he's clearly giving an indication that he has never in any of the time wanted to step down nor even consider those calls, because he thought they were just bitter calls. He didn't necessarily see them as part of a problem that he's an intricate part of, as Prof. Susan Boyce is saying. He doesn't put himself as part of these crises that have faced the ANC, and therefore comrades are simply bitter.
And interestingly enough, he also just talked about how he did his best while he was in office. Where do you place a statement like that, given all that has happened under him?
Wow, yes, one inevitably wonders, gosh, if that was his best, how did he become president? What went wrong at earlier ANC conferences? There was just no acknowledgement of any problem. State institutions collapsing, corrupted, captured, left, right, centered. Him sitting in the middle of such intense and disgraceful court cases, and involving him as president, both of the ANC and especially of the country. There is no sense of, yes, I could have done something slightly better, differently, and there was no acknowledgement. Perhaps one shouldn't expect it, but I would have expected a little more humility and acknowledging I could have done some things differently, because we're sitting with the evidence of incredible damage to the ANC in a time of Jacob Zuma.
But was it not asking too much, really? Because consistently, I mean, I don't remember him really making genuine acknowledgements.
Well, I think,
I mean, wherever he has done so sort of in a backhanded way or almost grudgingly.
Yeah, well, I mean, President Zuma is quite a laissez-faire president. He doesn't really care much. He gives what he thinks people should hear, but he does take some things quite personally, especially when people direct stuff at him. But I think the other thing he achieved now is to sort of set the pace for the incoming leadership of the ANC in terms of the issues that they need to focus on. So if you were hearing when he's talking about corruption, he brings in the private sector and centers it quite much that we deal with it in language that is quite soft: collusion, accounting irregularities,
kid gloves,
and kid gloves, he calls it. So that's important, and he even intimates to say corporate collusion is now worthy of a sentence of 10 years. So I think he's trying to say, while we focus on public sector corruption, private sector corruption must not be seen as something that must be dealt with in a different manner. That probably to an extent also calls for a rethinking of the role of the Competition Commission and how much more teeth do you give it to deal with the question of monopolies and the issue of collusion. And that for me is quite a big thing, and in actual fact some people have been discussing this in society to say you need to put the spotlight on both these forms of corruption, because when there's the relationship of a corruptor and a corruptee, you are dealing with people necessarily from the private sector giving bribes to people in government in most instances for this 500 billion expenditure that government has power over.
Well, the interesting thing that, I mean, well, staying with corruption and the cartels and collusion, because that's how he, I mean, grouped them. The interesting thing is that he went to town about private sector corruption, of course, the role of the Competition Commission, which must be applauded, but very little about state corruption and how we got to where we are. And this is right in the middle of a court decisions insisting that he should appoint a commission of inquiry.
Yes, that's exactly what I mean. Absolutely. The private sector is at least a 50% partner in this kind of corruption that we see. But in a speech like this, doesn't help just to blame the one side and really underemphasize the huge role in the state and the centrality of his own role in that process of corruption, allegations of corruption, in many cases quite a bit of evidence, even if he is managing to evade court action on that. So it would have been amazing, maybe too much to expect for a person's personal outgoing address, yes, but he could have broken new ground. I really believe that. He have said, this is what we have done wrong. We acknowledge the ANC is in dire strait because the ANC is sitting with a massive credibility crisis. South Africans in general, even ANC supporters in general, beyond the walls of this conference, they are looking for reassurances of credibility, of a new start, of acknowledging things are wrong, and this is what we have to do right in future. And I think Zuma did not help the ANC onto a road into the next phase of its existence.
Interestingly enough, on the issue of corruption, he spoke about the courts and the fact that all of these court cases give the perception of the ANC being a corrupt organization. Now, you've touched very briefly on the fact that there were quite a number of institutions that came under the attack, the courts not being exempt. But let's look at what he actually had to say about the role of the courts and how he believes they should not really be deciding political matters.
Yes, he even said that ANC cadres who take the ANC to the court, ill-disciplined, and he reverted back to a statement that had been made earlier that said that people should consider themselves self-expelled if they do that. And he then emphatically, and that was one of the few places, I think 2 or 3 places in the entire speech, long speech, that he went off text and became very passionate, that's his form of angry, very angry about comrades doing that, and promised that that will be a step in future. No more court actions. Again, not acknowledging at all that it is marginalized ANC cadres within the structures who are being disadvantaged through irregular procedures. Zuma emphasized here, use internal procedures, but those internal procedures just often do not work, are denied to many people, and that is why it's been going to the courts. But it was the courts are wrong, and the comrades who take the ANC to court are even more wrong than that.
In fact, isn't that, Lukwana, what is actually wrong with how he tends to approach things? Because, I mean, going to town about, people not using internal procedures, judges shouldn't be, a structure of the ANC all of a sudden, without acknowledging the fact that the reason people are going to court is precisely because they have lost faith in internal ANC procedures, which leaves them no option but to go to approach the courts.
No, most certainly, courts are part of our constitutional rights as a form of recourse when we have been wronged. Not only have people lost faith in ANC internal structures, they actually note the dysfunction of ANC internal structures. If you look at the NEC over time, it has not been able to listen to people petitioning it on a number of occasions. I mean, you read any court case that has found against the leadership of the ANC, it is replete with examples of how many times letters were sent to the leadership. But just to add on this point that he went to town about in terms of courts, he also spoke about other judgments that probably deal with issues that happen in government. And I think those are the recent judgments in the North Gauteng High Court, when he said we must frown upon judgments that seem to say we can suspend the Constitution for some time just to solve current problems. And I think there he's talking about him effectively being stripped of the powers, one, to appoint the judge who must preside over the State Commission, Judicial Commission, and secondly, powers being designated to the Deputy President to appoint the next National Director of Public Prosecutions. Of course, this has opened a big debate in society on where exactly should powers rest when the President is so conflicted and unable to act. By just those two judgments from the North Gauteng High Court, we see a situation where the judges are endorsing both the transfer of power to the judiciary on what should ideally be an executive function, and then on the other hand saying the Deputy President must be the one who appoints this. Whether the courts can do that or not, that's still going to be part of scholarly debate, but also probably in circles of constitutional law that's going to be debate. But there is no doubt that the President is conflicted and therefore is incapable to act in the best interest for the country insofar as those appointments are concerned. And someone said to me, he just escaped in terms of appointing the National Commissioner of the Police National Commissioner. So I mean, how many more things will he be conflicted about personally? But of course, this then throws the broader discussion again to this gathering that we are at of the ANC, the elective conference, to say, can the ANC afford to continue to have a deployed ANC president who is so conflicted and is compromising the mandate of the ANC to government?
And of course, it wasn't just the courts that came under scrutiny. We also had the SACP, the alliance, the roles of the leagues. President having a lot to say about either. I don't know which one either one of you wants to pick up on first. As I said?
Yes, indeed. We know that it was really, there was a reflection of the antipathy with parts of the Communist Party, for example, and we know there's an uncomfortable relationship with COSATU too, and COSATU is already split, and the current COSATU, that is, has been participating in marches against the president, and so those tensions came out, and that's about civil society too. He was angry about civil society being part of the protests and
NGOs. I think he specifically said that there are NGOs who are working to destroy the ANC.
Yes, and don't forget about the media.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But was it just me, Lukoni, who seemed to... I got a sense that, COSATU got a bit of a slap on the wrist compared to the South African Communist Party. It was almost like an afterthought.
Well, yes, but there are reasons to that too. The president of COSATU continues to be very close to the president. If you're watching at the dinner last night, where the president of COSATU was seated right next to the president, but not only because of that, COSATU came out in the Metsimahulu by-election quite seriously to say, as COSATU, we have not yet taken a resolution that departs from conference resolution that says we will support and campaign for the ANC. So that's very important to note. At a political level, the SACP seems to have angered him and done more damage. And there's no greater evidence, of course, of that than the fact that he didn't do a cabinet reshuffle. He did a cabinet removal of the Secretary General of the SACP to send that point home.
Well, I'm going to ask both of you to hold your thoughts right there. We're going to go to our colleague Shahan Ramkissoon, who is outside talking to some of the alliance partners.